What if the reason you still haven't found your life's mission is not because you lack purpose, but because you have been searching for it as the wrong person? Most people begin by asking, "What should I do with my life?" But a deeper question comes first. Who am I beneath everything I was taught to become? Before you can understand your direction, you must first understand the identity from which you are choosing. Because sometimes the career you pursue, the goals you chase, and even the dreams you call your own were quietly shaped by expectations you accepted long before you were old enough to question them. This is where the deeper psychological journey begins, not with finding an answer, but with discovering the parts of yourself you have never truly met. Before you can discover what your life is asking you to do, there is a more difficult question you must face. Do you truly know who you are? Most people begin the search for their mission by looking outward. They ask what career they should choose, what goal they should pursue, what success should look like, or what contribution they should make. But very few stop to question the identity from which they are asking these questions. You may say, "I want this life," while a deeper part of you quietly asks, "Do you really want it? Or were you simply taught to want it?" This question can be uncomfortable, because much of what we call identity is formed before we are old enough to examine it. You learn what is considered successful. You learn what is respectable. You learn what kind of person receives approval and what kind of person is criticized. Slowly, these lessons become part of your inner world. You begin making choices based not only on what you genuinely desire, but on what you believe will make you acceptable. A child may learn that being intelligent brings praise, so intelligence becomes part of the identity. Another may learn that being useful earns love, so they become the person who is always needed. Someone else may discover that expressing emotion creates rejection, so they become calm, controlled, and distant. These adaptations can help us survive certain environments, but eventually we may forget that they were adaptations at all. We begin to believe they are our complete personality. This is where the search for a life mission becomes complicated. How can you recognize your true direction if you are listening through layers of expectation? How can you distinguish your authentic desire from the voice of a parent, a culture, a social group, or a fear that has been repeated so many times it now sounds like common sense? Many people choose their entire lives without ever asking these questions. They pursue a profession because it is considered secure. They remain in relationships because leaving would disappoint others. They define success through possessions, status, or recognition because they were taught that these things prove a person's value. From the outside, their lives may look perfectly successful, yet inwardly, something remains unsettled. This inner restlessness is often misunderstood. People assume that if they feel empty, despite achieving what they wanted, they must be ungrateful. But gratitude and dissatisfaction can exist together. You can appreciate what you have and still recognize that something essential within you has been neglected. You can succeed according to the standards of the world and still feel that your life is not fully your own. This is where the deeper psychological journey begins. There is a social identity that each person develops in order to function in the world. You have a name, a profession, a role in your family, a reputation, and a particular way of presenting yourself to others. These roles are necessary. We cannot live without some form of social identity. The problem begins when you mistake the role for the whole person. You are not only the employee, the parent, the partner, the successful person, the responsible one, the strong one, or the person everyone depends upon. These are parts of your life, but they are not the totality of your being. When you identify too completely with one role, everything outside that role begins to feel threatening. If you have built your identity around being successful, failure becomes terrifying. If you have built it around being needed, independence can feel like rejection. If you have built it around being strong, vulnerability begins to feel like weakness. Your life mission often begins to reveal itself when this false completeness starts to break apart. This does not mean you must abandon your responsibilities or reject the life you have built. It means you must become honest enough to ask whether the life you are protecting still reflects the person you are becoming. The journey toward wholeness requires you to examine the identities you inherited and decide which ones genuinely belong to you. This process is not always comfortable because the authentic self is not necessarily the self that receives the most approval. Sometimes your deeper direction will require you to disappoint people who benefited from your old identity. Sometimes becoming more yourself means no longer being who others need you to be. And sometimes the greatest fear is not failure, but the possibility that you might actually discover what you are capable of becoming. The search for purpose, then, is not simply a search for an occupation. It is a gradual movement toward inner authenticity. You begin observing what gives you a sense of meaning rather than merely pleasure. You notice which activities make you lose awareness of time. You pay attention to the questions that continue returning throughout your life. You recognize the subjects that awaken your curiosity even when nobody is rewarding you for caring about them. These clues matter because your deeper nature often speaks through repetition. What continues to return to your thoughts may be more important than what briefly attracts your attention. What you cannot stop wondering about may contain a question your life is asking you to explore. What you repeatedly feel compelled to understand may point toward a direction that has been waiting beneath the surface of your conscious plans. Your mission may not appear as a single dramatic revelation. It may emerge slowly as you become more honest about what feels meaningful to you. First, you separate your own voice from the voices you have inherited. Then, you begin to recognize the difference between a life that looks impressive and a life that feels internally true. And perhaps, the first secret of discovering your mission is realizing that you cannot find your true path while continuing to live as someone you were never meant to be. Once you begin separating your authentic voice from the identities you inherited, another part of the journey begins. You start to encounter the aspects of yourself that you have spent years trying not to see. This is where many people turn away. They are willing to discover their strengths, their talents, their kindness, their intelligence, and the qualities they feel proud to display. But the search for a meaningful life cannot be built only from the parts of yourself you find comfortable. There are also emotions, desires, fears, ambitions, wounds, and impulses that you may have pushed into the background because they did not fit the image you wanted to have of yourself. These hidden aspects do not simply disappear because you refuse to acknowledge them. They continue to exist within you, influencing your choices from places you may not consciously recognize. You may believe you are choosing a certain path because it is practical, when beneath the surface, you are afraid of being judged. You may believe you are helping everyone because you are naturally generous, while a deeper part of you is terrified that you will not be loved unless you are needed. You may call yourself humble, while secretly suppressing an ambition that has been waiting for permission to exist. You may say that you do not care about recognition, while feeling intense resentment whenever someone else receives the opportunity you secretly wanted. These contradictions are not proof that you are a bad person. They are evidence that you are a complex person. Every human being contains qualities that do not always fit neatly together. You can be compassionate and angry. You can be generous and ambitious. You can love someone and still need distance from them. You can want independence and still fear being alone. The problem is not that these opposing qualities exist. The problem begins when you deny one side so completely that it begins to influence your life unconsciously. The hidden side of your personality often reveals itself through emotional intensity. Pay attention to the people who provoke unusually strong reactions within you. Sometimes your anger toward another person is completely justified. But sometimes the intensity of your reaction reveals something deeper. You may strongly dislike someone who expresses a quality you've forbidden yourself to express. You may envy someone who is living with a freedom you secretly desire. You may criticize another person's confidence because you have spent years suppressing your own. This does not mean every emotional reaction is a projection. Again, wisdom requires discernment. But when a reaction seems disproportionately powerful, it deserves examination. Ask yourself, what exactly is this person awakening in me? Perhaps they remind you of a quality you abandoned. Perhaps they represent a version of yourself you were never allowed to become. Perhaps their behavior touches an old wound that has not yet been understood. The purpose of this reflection is not to blame yourself for every feeling. It is to become curious about what your feelings may be trying to reveal. Your deeper mission may be hidden inside these rejected qualities. The person who has spent years suppressing their creativity may suddenly discover that the thing they called impractical is actually the source of their deepest vitality. The person who was taught to remain silent may eventually realize that their voice is precisely what they are meant to develop. The person who was always expected to be strong may discover that their sensitivity, once considered a weakness, allows them to understand people in a way others cannot. What you have rejected may contain energy. This is one of the reasons inner transformation can feel so confusing. You are not simply adding new qualities to your personality. You are also reclaiming parts of yourself that were pushed away long ago. The process may bring discomfort because the old identity was built around keeping these qualities hidden. Imagine someone who has always been praised for being responsible. They become the person everyone depends upon. They solve problems, manage crises, and rarely ask for help. Over time, they begin to believe that their value depends upon being strong. But beneath this identity, there may be an exhausted part of them, longing to rest, receive support, and live without constantly carrying everyone else. If they refuse to acknowledge this hidden need, their life may eventually become filled with resentment. They may blame others for demanding too much, even though they have never learned to communicate their limits. The hidden part of themselves begins influencing their relationships through frustration and withdrawal. But the moment they honestly recognize this suppressed need, something changes. They can begin setting boundaries. They can ask for help without shame. They can remain generous without sacrificing themselves completely. The hidden part no longer needs to control them from the unconscious because it has been brought into awareness. This is the deeper meaning of facing yourself. You are not trying to destroy the parts of you that make you uncomfortable. You are trying to understand them. The goal is not to become a person who has no anger, no fear, no ambition, no jealousy, or no darkness. Such a person does not exist. The goal is to become conscious enough to recognize these energies before they begin directing your life without your awareness. And when you begin integrating these hidden qualities, your sense of purpose often becomes clearer. You stop wasting energy pretending to be someone you are not. The energy that was once spent on suppression becomes available for creativity, courage, meaningful work, and genuine connection. Perhaps the part of yourself you have spent the longest trying to hide is carrying a message about the person you are meant to become. Once you begin to understand the hidden parts of yourself, another illusion starts to weaken. The belief that a successful life is automatically a meaningful life. This is one of the most difficult realizations a person can face, because society constantly teaches us to measure our lives from the outside. We are shown images of achievement, wealth, recognition, influence, and status. We are encouraged to ask, how much have I accomplished? How successful do I appear? What do other people think of me? But far less often are we taught to ask a more important question. Does the life I am building actually belong to me? There is a difference between being admired and being fulfilled. There is a difference between achieving what people expect from you and discovering what genuinely gives your life meaning. Many people spend years climbing a ladder only to reach the top and realize that it was leaning against the wrong wall. They worked hard. They made sacrifices. They followed the rules. They achieved the goals they were told would make them happy. And yet, when the noise becomes quiet, they discover an emptiness they cannot easily explain. This emptiness is often misunderstood as failure, but sometimes it is not failure at all. Sometimes it is the psyche recognizing that the identity you have built can no longer contain the person you are becoming. From the earliest stages of life, you receive messages about what you should become. You are told what professions are respectable, what lifestyles are successful, what relationships are desirable, and what achievements prove your worth. These messages are not always intentionally harmful. Often, they come from people who genuinely want to protect you. Your family may encourage a secure career because they fear you will struggle. Society may praise certain forms of success because they appear to offer safety. Friends may influence your choices because you want to belong. Slowly, without realizing it, you begin collecting these expectations. You may choose a career because it makes your family proud. You may pursue money because you believe financial success will finally make you feel worthy. You may remain in a relationship because leaving would make you appear selfish. You may continue living a lifestyle that exhausts you because everyone around you considers it normal. Eventually, the question becomes unavoidable. Are you living from your own inner direction, or are you performing a role that has been rewarded by the world? This is where the concept of the persona becomes psychologically important. The persona is the social face you develop to move through life. It is the version of yourself you present to different situations. You may be professional at work, responsible with family, confident with friends, and composed in public. These roles are not false in themselves. They are necessary aspects of being human. But the danger begins when the mask becomes so familiar that you forget there is a person behind it. You may become so identified with being the strong one that you no longer know how to express weakness. You may become so attached to being the successful one that failure feels like the end of your identity. You may become so committed to being the good person that you suppress anger, disagreement, and personal boundaries. The role begins to control the person. And when that happens, the search for a life mission becomes confused. You may ask, "What should I do with my life?" while unconsciously meaning, "What should I do that will continue to make everyone approve of me?" These are not the same question. Your true direction may not always be the direction that receives the greatest applause. Sometimes it will require you to disappoint people who have become attached to your old identity. Sometimes you will have to admit that a goal you once pursued no longer represents your deepest values. Sometimes you will discover that what you thought was ambition was actually a desperate attempt to prove that you were worthy. This realization can feel frightening because the old identity, even when painful, is familiar. The authentic self is less predictable. It may ask you to take a path that cannot be explained easily to others. It may lead you toward work that feels meaningful rather than impressive. It may encourage you to leave environments where you are praised but internally disappearing. The challenge is not to reject society completely. You still need relationships, responsibilities, and cooperation with others. The challenge is to remain connected to the world without allowing the world to completely define you. Your life mission begins to become clearer when you learn to listen beneath the noise of expectation. What would you still care about if nobody applauded you? What would you continue exploring if there were no immediate reward? What problem would you still want to understand, even if no one considered it important? What kind of work makes you feel more alive rather than merely more impressive? These questions do not produce instant answers. They create a relationship with your deeper self, and slowly, you begin to understand that the purpose of your life may not be to become the person everyone expects you to be. It may be to become the person who exists beneath all the expectations you were taught to carry. The life that looks successful from the outside may not be the life that fulfills you within. And discovering that difference may be the beginning of finding your true mission. Once you begin questioning the identity you have been performing for the world, you may notice something else. Your inner life has been speaking to you for much longer than you realized. It has been speaking through patterns, images, dreams, emotional reactions, and experiences that repeatedly return to your attention. The problem is that most people are trained to listen only to what can be explained logically. They trust numbers, schedules, plans, and visible evidence. These things are valuable, of course, but human beings are not guided by logic alone. Beneath conscious thought exists a deeper psychological world that communicates in a different language. It does not always speak in clear sentences. Sometimes it speaks through a dream that stays in your memory long after you wake. sometimes through a recurring image that appears in different forms throughout your life. Sometimes through the same kind of relationship, repeating again and again, despite your promise that you will never make the same mistake. Sometimes through an intense fascination with a subject you cannot explain. Sometimes through a question that refuses to disappear. These repetitions deserve attention. This does not mean every coincidence is a message or every dream is a prediction. It is important to remain thoughtful. The human mind naturally searches for patterns, and not every pattern carries a hidden destiny. But when something repeatedly captures your attention, it creates deep emotion, or appears during an important period of inner change, it may be psychologically meaningful. The meaning does not necessarily come from the event itself. It may come from what the event awakens within you. Imagine that you repeatedly dream of standing at the entrance of an unfamiliar house. The dream is not necessarily telling you that a literal house is waiting somewhere in your future. The house may represent your own inner world. The unfamiliar rooms may symbolize parts of your personality that you have never explored. A locked door may represent something you have avoided confronting. A staircase may suggest movement between different levels of awareness. Symbols do not always provide simple answers. They invite questions. What part of yourself does this image represent? What emotion appears whenever it returns? What is happening in your life when this symbol becomes prominent? Why does this particular image affect you more deeply than another? This is how the unconscious often communicates. It does not always tell you what to do. It presents an image, a feeling, or a pattern and waits for you to become conscious enough to understand the relationship. Your dreams can become especially valuable in this process. During sleep, the conscious mind loosens its control. The inner world begins expressing itself through symbolic images and emotional experiences. A dream may reveal a conflict you have been ignoring. It may show you a fear that you refuse to acknowledge during the day. It may bring back a person from your past, not because you are meant to return to them, but because something connected to that relationship remains psychologically unfinished. The important question is not always, what does this dream predict? A more useful question may be, what is this dream revealing about me? The same principle applies to your waking life. Pay attention to the patterns that repeat. Do you repeatedly find yourself in situations where you must rescue everyone? Do you repeatedly abandon your own goals to gain approval? Do you repeatedly choose people who confirm your deepest fears? Do you repeatedly begin something meaningful and then destroy your own progress when success becomes possible? Patterns are often messages from the unconscious, not necessarily because they are supernatural, but because they reveal what you continue to do without fully understanding why. When a pattern becomes conscious, you gain the possibility of changing it. This is also where meaningful coincidences can become psychologically interesting. There may be moments when an unexpected event seems to connect deeply with what you have been thinking or experiencing. Perhaps you have been struggling with a question for months, and a conversation unexpectedly introduces a perspective you needed. Perhaps you begin exploring a subject and suddenly encounter it in several unrelated places. Perhaps someone appears in your life at a moment when you are ready to understand something about yourself. You should not immediately conclude that every coincidence has been arranged specifically for you. But neither should you dismiss every meaningful experience simply because it cannot be measured like a physical object. The psychological value of such moments lies in the meaning they awaken. They can cause you to pause. They can interrupt automatic thinking. They can make you question an old direction and become more attentive to what your inner world has been trying to reveal. Your life mission may not appear as a voice telling you exactly what to do. It may emerge through what you repeatedly return to, the subjects that fascinate you, the problems you cannot stop thinking about, the kinds of people you feel compelled to help, the questions that have followed you through different stages of life. These recurring elements may form a psychological pattern, and when you begin to see that pattern, you may realize that your purpose was not absent. You were simply looking for it in one dramatic answer, when it had been quietly revealing itself through the symbols, dreams, patterns, and questions that kept returning to you. The unconscious rarely shouts. It repeats itself until you are finally willing to listen. As you begin to recognize the patterns within your dreams, emotions, and repeated experiences, another possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps your life's mission is not hidden in some distant future, waiting for you to discover it. Perhaps it has been forming quietly through the very struggles you have spent years trying to escape. This does not mean that every painful experience has a predetermined purpose. Pain is not automatically meaningful simply because it happened. Some experiences are unjust, some are tragic, and some wounds require time, support, and healing. But even when you cannot choose what happens to you, you can gradually choose what you will do with what has happened. This is where personal struggle can become psychologically significant. Think about the questions that have followed you throughout your life. Perhaps you have always wondered why people abandon one another. Perhaps you have struggled with feeling unseen, misunderstood, or powerless. Perhaps you have experienced failure so deeply that you became obsessed with understanding how people rebuild themselves. Perhaps you have spent years trying to understand your own mind because confusion has been one of your most familiar experiences. These questions may not be random. Sometimes the problem that has wounded you becomes the question you are uniquely prepared to explore. The person who has experienced isolation may develop an extraordinary understanding of belonging. The person who has lived through uncertainty may become deeply interested in helping others find clarity. The person who has struggled with self-worth may eventually discover a powerful desire to help others recognize their value. But this transformation does not happen automatically. There is a difference between suffering and understanding suffering. A painful experience can make a person bitter, or it can eventually become the beginning of wisdom. The difference often depends on whether the individual is willing to consciously examine what happened, rather than allowing the experience to remain an unconscious force controlling every future decision. Imagine someone who was repeatedly rejected early in life. They may respond in several ways. They may spend their entire life trying to prove themselves to people who never valued them. They may avoid relationships entirely because rejection feels unbearable. Or, through deep self-understanding, they may begin asking what rejection taught them about their identity, their expectations, and the way they relate to others. Over time, they may discover that the question of belonging has become central to their life. They may become a writer, teacher, counselor, artist, or creator whose work helps others feel understood. The original wound does not disappear, but it is no longer only a source of pain. It has been transformed into insight. This is one of the most important principles of inner transformation. What remains unconscious tends to repeat itself, but what becomes conscious can be understood and redirected. Perhaps you have noticed that certain struggles return in different forms. The same fear appears in different relationships. The same insecurity emerges in different situations. The same conflict follows you from one environment to another. You may believe that the problem is always outside you, but eventually you begin to ask what inner pattern keeps attracting the same experience. This question is not about blaming yourself. It is about reclaiming awareness. You cannot always control what others do. You cannot prevent every disappointment. You cannot guarantee that life will never hurt you again. But you can begin to understand the psychological patterns through which you respond to life. You can ask why certain situations awaken such intense fear. You can examine why you repeatedly abandon your own needs. You can discover what belief about yourself is being confirmed every time the pattern returns. And sometimes, within that examination, a direction begins to appear. Your mission may be connected to the very question you have been trying to answer for yourself. The person who has spent years searching for meaning may eventually help others find it. The person who has struggled to understand the unconscious may create art, education, or work that brings hidden psychological realities into awareness. The person who has experienced profound loneliness may build communities where others feel seen. The person who has repeatedly faced inner chaos may develop a gift for helping others create order from confusion. Again, this does not mean you must turn your pain into a career. Not every wound needs to become a public purpose. Sometimes healing is the mission. Sometimes learning to live peacefully is enough. Sometimes your deepest contribution is not based on the story you tell the world, but on the way you treat the people closest to you. The important question is not, how can I make my suffering impressive? The deeper question is, what has my life repeatedly asked me to understand? This question can reveal something powerful. Your mission may not be connected to what you have always been naturally good at. It may be connected to what you have been compelled to understand. Talent can attract you toward an activity, but a deep psychological question can keep calling you back for decades. Notice what you cannot stop exploring. Notice what kind of injustice disturbs you most deeply. Notice what kind of confusion you feel compelled to clarify. Notice the problems you continue returning to, even when no one asks you to. These may be clues. Your life's mission is not necessarily found by escaping your history. Sometimes it is found by understanding your history so deeply that it no longer controls you, and then allowing the wisdom gained from that understanding to become part of what you give to the world. The struggle that once asked, "Why is this happening to me?" may eventually become the question that reveals what you are here to understand, create, or contribute. And after you have questioned the identity you inherited, faced the hidden parts of yourself, examined the expectations of society, listened to the patterns of your unconscious, and transformed your struggles into understanding, you eventually arrive at a deeper realization. Your life's mission is not something you simply find once and then possess forever. It is something you gradually become capable of living. Many people imagine purpose as a single answer. They believe that somewhere in the world there is one perfect career, one perfect calling, or one extraordinary discovery that will finally explain why they are here. They wait for a moment of absolute certainty, expecting the path to become completely clear before they take the first step. But life rarely reveals itself that way. You often understand your direction only after you begin moving. The path becomes visible through participation. You take one step, learn something about yourself, and then the next step becomes possible. You make a decision, encounter an unexpected difficulty, discover a hidden ability, and suddenly, your understanding of yourself expands. Purpose is not always found through thinking about life from a distance. Sometimes, it is discovered by entering life more deeply. This is why the journey toward becoming yourself is so important. You are not searching for a perfect identity that has been waiting somewhere outside you. You are gradually bringing different parts of yourself into greater awareness. Your strengths, fears, desires, wounds, values, and contradictions begin to form a more complete picture. The goal is not to become perfect. Perfection is often another mask. It creates the illusion that you must eliminate every weakness before you are allowed to live meaningfully. But a whole person is not someone who has no darkness, no confusion, or no conflict. A whole person is someone who has become conscious of these things and is no longer completely controlled by them. You may still feel fear and move forward. You may still experience doubt and make a decision. You may still carry wounds while learning how to love. You may still have unanswered questions while offering something valuable to others. This is important because many people postpone their purpose while waiting to become a finished version of themselves. They say, "One day, when I am more confident, I will begin. One day, when I understand everything, I will act. One day, when I am completely healed, I will become who I am meant to be." But there is no final moment when you become completely finished. Human development is a lifelong process. Every new stage reveals another layer of yourself. The person you are today may understand a purpose that the person you were 10 years ago could not have recognized. This means your mission may evolve. At one stage of life, your purpose may be learning to survive and become independent. At another, it may be creating something. Later, it may become teaching, serving, mentoring, protecting, or helping others avoid the mistakes you once had to learn through experience. The outer form changes because you change. What remains consistent is the deeper movement toward greater authenticity. This is why comparing your path to someone else's can be so destructive. You see another person's visible mission and assume you should already have the same clarity. But you do not know the inner journey that produced their direction. You do not know what they had to confront, what they had to release, or what questions shaped them. Your mission will emerge from your own psychological history. The things you have questioned, the patterns you have survived, the qualities you have developed, and the parts of yourself you have learned to integrate all contribute to the direction you eventually take. Sometimes your purpose is not discovered through a sudden revelation, but through a gradual recognition. You notice that certain activities consistently make you feel more alive. You notice that certain conversations leave you with a sense of meaning. You notice that certain problems naturally attract your attention. You realize that the qualities you once considered weaknesses have become sources of understanding. You begin to see that your life has been forming a pattern, not a rigid destiny that removes your freedom, but a pattern of tendencies, interests, values, and inner questions that can guide your choices if you become conscious enough to observe them. This is where responsibility enters the journey. Discovering your direction does not mean waiting for life to force you into it. You must choose. You must act. You must accept that the path will contain uncertainty. No psychological insight can remove the need for courage. At some point, you must move from asking, "What is my mission?" to asking, "What can I do today that expresses the person I am becoming?" The answer may be small. It may be writing one page, learning one skill, having one honest conversation, setting one boundary, beginning one project, offering your knowledge to someone who needs it, choosing not to return to an old pattern. Purpose becomes real through action. You do not find your life's mission by waiting for a perfect sign. You discover it by becoming increasingly honest, increasingly conscious, and increasingly willing to live according to what you understand. And perhaps the deepest secret is this: your mission was never a hidden sentence waiting to be discovered. It was the person you were becoming, quietly revealing itself through everything you were brave enough to understand.